What you doing?
I am trying to figure out why this brand new copy of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft is so controversial on Twitter.
Okay. Well, what does Twitter say is controversial about it?
I guess it depends on what segment of Twitter you're talking about.
Okay. But you figured you'd just read the thing
And make
see
my
if
own
you
judgments.
Could find anything controversial?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, I don't know if I've ever bothered describing any of this, but like, as you know, in modern times, the fact that one of the primary axes that you define your player character on is race is a little problematic because, you know, obviously the word race carries a lot of baggage, and even though the original, authors might have intended it like race is meant in Lord of the Rings, we don't live in the fucking 30s anymore, so we don't get to live in that world. And so this is the very first D&D book that has decided to make the transition to calling them lineages, which functionally doesn't make any change at all to the game mechanics. It's just renaming their type. I mean, other games or science fiction settings will often call them species. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, some people have taken offense to like the idea that they're changing their childhood thing. So
Some people have taken offense that they're changing it to lineage.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how would you use these things in gameplay? Would you say my race is Elven, or versus my lineage
is Elven? Yeah, it just replaces the word race, but it makes no functional difference.
Okay.
An elf is still an elf.
Okay.
And I've seen that, like, when they're like other game companies have been trying to put out products to like adjust to this call, largely that came out from people on Twitter who don't actually play the game.
Right. I was gonna say, did anybody actually have a problem with using the word race to describe these different types of creatures? Or is that just a response to what's going on in society in general?
It's kind of a response to society in general. I mean, this is actually kind of an old debate in gaming, because, I mean, like, race has been, a baggage-laden word since the 70s,
sure,
when they invented this stuff. So,
yeah.
Since you have humans in the game, like, what exactly are you supposed to call their sub-ethnicities? Because ethnicity is not exactly a...
Right. So this is how I look at it, right? You have different races of cat. You have the Siamese cat.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Persian or flat-faced cat.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like you just ran into the door a bunch of times.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all cats.
Yeah.
But then there's different races of cat. Like, that's how I think about it. That's not really accurate as far as science goes, but that's my thinking about race is like, okay, there's cats and then there's types of cats. So there's lineages and then there's types of lineages.
Well, I mean, like I was gonna say, like, some other words that have been like bandied about is like call them ancestry or call them origin. As I say, like other games or games of a more sci-fi bent will tend to call it species instead of race.
Okay, have we like looked up the dictionary definition of any of these words?
Species is like easily defined based just on like the biological facts of can two of them breed together and have viable offspring, then that's a species. Okay. In which case, since in D&D. Humans and orcs can breed,
okay,
and humans and elves can breed, so that kind of makes human, elves, and orcs all the same species. And, in regards to, like, a lot of this controversy originally started because some genius on Twitter, while reading Volo's Guide to Monster, thought the description to orcs in that reminded him of what he thought about black people. And so, by using hashtags and whatnot, has created, like, a bunch of fervor over, the orcs in general as being some sort of stereotype directed at a negative stereotype of black. Also, the general concept of evil races is now something that D&D is trying to backpedal from. And there's some people, I've yet to find it in this book, but I have heard some people complain that also this supplement is also the beginning of them abandoning the alignment system, which I'm not necessarily sure I'm against, but that's as speaking as an old gamer who's always found alignment as an odd thing to try to like force people to like Yeah, it's a weird mechanic. So
Yeah.
I don't mind it being phased out. There are like things in the game like, you know, you have spells like protection from good or evil. Well, without an alignment system, it's real arbitrary what the fuck that means in some instances.
Okay,
but also, like, you know, if you're, you know, looking at things from a realistic psychological point of view, like, everyone should have multiple alignments in different situations.
Right.
You have different aspects of yourself take center stage,
Right.
and circumstantial blah, blah,
but
blah.
are they replacing that with something?
Not as far as I can tell. They're just dropping alignment. Also, like, people have complained that several, like, okay, so what this kind of is just a new 5th edition version of an old 2nd edition and 3rd edition setting called the Domains of Dread, which is based off the original Ravenloft adventure module from the 80s, which is basically just a really thin, like, renaming of stuff from Dracula and turning that into a D&D adventure where characters, you know, wander into some mist in a forest, and then they appear in this magical valley called Barovia, which is like this Eastern European style valley, you know, where this vampire king or count rules over the land, and he's like stuck where keeps trying to find the reincarnation of his wife from when he originally turned it. It's very Dracula.
Sure, yeah.
And, you know, and in the adventure, the characters get some items and, you know, solve some shit, and they explore the castle, and then hopefully they're able to defeat Strahd, and then after you defeat Strahd, you're able to finally escape Barovia and go back to your own world.
I see.
And there's other domains, and so what that is a domain of dread, where, like, people who are exceptionally evil and did really bad things, like, their punishment, you know, is to, like, be immortal, and they are, like, the central powerful being of their little domain, but they have this domain created for them in the ethereal plane and, like, the lands of the dead kind of a thing, where it's like, it's also their trap. They're trapped in it, and they're bound to it. They are its heart.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. And this book basically just goes through and describes a bunch of the other domains of dread, most of which were lifted from the older versions of the game. Except a lot of, like, the central big characters that are, you know, the main villains of a lot of these pieces, they've changed some of their racial makeup in terms of, you know, human ideas of skin color, race, and also flipped a lot of genders around.
They changed their
so we have, like,
lineage makeup.
Yes, they've changed their lineage from being, like, there's, you know, like, there's a haunted carnival setting, and the leader of the carnival, like, the actual villain is this magic sword she has, but she's the one that wields the magic sword, so she's like the face.
All right.
And it's an elf lady, and in the pictures, it's a black elf lady, which, like, who cares? But also, like, who cares?
But wait.
And, like, they turn their Frankenstein ripoff into a woman.
Is a black elf species... Wait, or lineage. Is a black elf lineage different from a white elf lineage?
No,
because they're
just elves. Yeah, elves. Because, like, that's the thing where, like, where I get my, does it kind of matter? Like, everyone wants to play cowboys and Indians, so let the kid play cowboys and Indians. It doesn't matter if he looks like an Indian or not.
Right.
Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there is the argument, like, these are tropes out of, like, Northern European myth. And if we were doing this with stuff taken from African myth or Eastern Asian myth, people would get all up in an uproar if we were, like, turning an African guy white.
Sure.
You know, or stuff like that.
Yeah, he's an African guy.
But, you know, like, but regarding to, like, the idea of whether or not black elves should be a thing, when I was in high school and Star Trek Voyager came on, I remember my dad saying something about, like, why is Tuvok black? Why would there be a black Vulcan? And I was like, well, Dad, there'd be black Vulcans for the same reason there's black humans.
Yeah.
And he had no comeback for that. And so I kind of feel like that's probably the answer to the whole riddle of the black elf. But there's been several of those. There's also, like, a Germanic setting where, like, their devil fiddler character is now a black guy. And, like I said, they changed their Frankenstein to a woman.
But I thought part of this is not portraying certain stereotypes as being the bad guy.
Yeah. Well, let's see, by getting rid of the alignment system, that kind of blurs away the idea that there's any of these things are evil. They might be antagonistic, but they're not necessarily evil anymore. It's
which again would be something that
it's an easy
might be
way
good for the game.
If we get rid of alignment, then there's no evil races because no races have alignment. The thing is like, I'm a 90s gamer, so I'm already from a generation that was already doing shit like subverting expectations, where like, you're an adventurer in the swamp, and the village thinks that the evil lizard men who live in the swamp stole their idol, and then it turns out that the lizard men are actually the good guys, and they're being picked on.
Yeah.
Or, you actually find out that the orcs aren't actually as bad, and they've been being manipulated, and you can actually turn them to your side.
Right.
I've already been on this page, and that's why I find some of this kind of like, they're acting like, look at this great new thing we've invented. Like, no, you haven't invented shit. This isn't an accomplishment. There is an angle that, because of like the stratification of the two fandoms and role-playing games, which is the same as you've seen with Star Wars fandom and comic book fandom and Star Trek fandom. There's definitely a hint that they're purposely like poking the bear, kind of a vibe I get with this. It's like, they didn't, and all these changes are unnecessary, especially since they actually, like, the thing I like about this book is it has some of the very rare 5th edition non-European settings to be found. Like, for a company that's so woke, like, almost all their settings are basically based on Western Europe, which means that, yes, they've included minority characters in there, but that still means that in the fantasy world, they're still minorities. There is no African country.
Right.
They're just a small group of black characters living in Faerun.
Right.
Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So, so like they have several settings. They have a Mesoamerican setting. They have like an Egyptian setting. They have like an ancient Indian setting. Like, so like, yeah, they gave them a space, but they also want to have them both spaces. But it doesn't matter.
But I mean, ultimately, are these things going to be seen as a sign of the times? Are they going to blend in seamlessly with the rest of the changes and updates that they've made in other... I mean, they're obviously trying to appeal to somebody to sell a book.
Well, I mean, by virtue of the fact that this is the 5th edition, not even including the original, like, basic D&D, this is the 5th edition of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, technically, in terms of its lineage.
Okay.
But, oh, god damn it, what was your question again?
Is it... They're obviously trying to do this.
Oh,
they want to sell
is a
books.
sign of the times.
Is it gonna stand out and seem weird later on, or is it gonna seem like was a part of the natural order of things?
That's hard to say for this in particular, because like there's a lot of things that's going on in our pop culture that 10 years from now might be cringy, or 10 years from now we've all just like forgotten that we used to resist it because we've just been browbeaten into finally accepting it. My thing I come back to is that in the end, the person running the game controls how they portray everything. So you can like the paintings that portray Black Lady in a dramatic setting. Doesn't mean anything. You could rename the characters. You just take little bits and pieces out of this book.
Is that supposed to be a black lady?
That is like a gypsy-ish quasi-black lady.
It's like a vaguely European person.
Yeah, I know, because they don't even do black very well. Riveting entertainment right here as I flip through this book that you can't see to show her something.
It's pretty cool looking, though.
See, like, they got a couple black girls fighting a werewolf, wearing, like, real traditional black attire of European bodices.
Yes,
and
this is very British.
Gloves.
I mean...
So, I mean, yeah, like, it's ridiculous. Like...
Yeah.
A lot of it is to appease a market that doesn't exist. Like I saw something on another channel recently, like it was for comic books, but like you can extrapolate from that what it also applies to the RPGs. But like apparently only 5% of the comic book audience has Twitter accounts and cares about the Twittery kind of shit.
Yeah, right.
So like they're alienating 95% of their market.
Yeah.
To appeal to this 5% of crazies.
Yeah,
and I feel that something real similar is kind of going on with D&D.
Yeah.
Thing is it's Wizards of the Coast is, their company that made Magic the Gathering, the card game. And then they bought D&D from TSR, which is the company that invented D&D.
Okay.
And then Hasbro bought Wizards of the Coast.
Okay.
And that's in part why D&D is popular right now, because Hasbro, through their connections to Netflix, because Netflix produces and platforms cartoons of theirs, conveniently they managed to have a whole popular TV show based around Dungeons & Dragons that was aimed at a youth demographic with a bunch of retro 80s crap in the form of Stranger Things, which conveniently D&D had put out a starter box set themed all around Stranger Things. Also, they have connections to Cartoon Network, And through Adult Swim, they managed to also do some cross-promotional shit with Rick and Morty. So, you know,
Very
and then
good.
they also have a Rick and Morty starter box set for young kids to learn D&D from. So this has all been a real strategic marketing thing to bring in, you know, an unyouthful market audience.
Yeah.
And it's been successful to a certain degree.
So we want to uphold the standards of the 5% of people on Twitter that, I mean, the other people aren't speaking out. You sound like you're going to go to somebody's house and talk to them and see what the real opinion is.
The thing is like, they're a toy company. I secretly suspect that the D&D merchandise is probably the more profitable thing than actually selling the D&D books. And the fact that they also promote, you know, live stream podcasts of people, of really pretty people playing games. It creates a passive audience that never has to play it, doesn't have to buy the books, can complain on Twitter all day long about wanting the changes and stuff because they're viewing it as they're watching entertainment. They're not really watching people play a game because they're not trying to vicariously learn the game.
Right.
It's just a form of entertainment.
It's all a show.
I mean, that and conveniently the most popular and critical role, like full of pretty people. It's why I refuse to watch even one episode of it, because D&D is not for pretty people. Pretty people can play D&D, but it's not for fucking them. Go have your fucking parties and drink your beer and get raped at a frat house. D&D is for people who look way worse than I do. So, you know...
You're not supposed to look shame people, and as
but
you know...
by creating this passive audience, they have an even larger number of people who could buy D&D t-shirts, buy little owlbear purses, and little, like, you know, coloring books and for
cool.
adults and stuff, and act like they're a D&D fan, and maybe they've played it once or twice, didn't like it, and complained about all the action and the fact that they couldn't choose their particular 31st gender option.
Whatever, that's great. So, but, so now let's look at this book as though I get the show. The show is for certain people that are not actually players. What are the benefits or drawbacks of this book for real players that don't give a fuck about any of that stuff? Because you know you can make it whatever you want.
From my angle... There's several monsters in the back that are nice and can be transplanted into any D&D game. I especially am fond of the brain in the jar. It's someone's brain that's been put in a jar and it's got psychic powers. It's low level in terms of like strength, but it could be like a master villain just because of how smart it is in figuring it out. You know. I do like the 3 new lineages it includes. I like the Dampiers. They're like half vampires, like Blade. They have this new thing called a hex blood, which is like someone who in their infancy or childhood has been warped by the magic of hags, and so they're kind of a half hag, but they're not like from fucking a half hag kind of thing. And then they have the thing called the Reborn, which is kind of like a Frankenstein's monster resurrected from the dead kind of character, brought back to life kind of character. And those are all the neat options for a D&D game. Of the 3, having half vampires is probably the one that appeals most to me. And Dark Gifts, like the setting they did based off a Magic the Gathering setting called Mythic Odysseys of Theros, had introduced another layer of power and set dressing for characters in terms of like a supernatural gift from whatever god they follow, which could take the form of a bunch of different things. This has something similar in the form of Dark Gifts. And that's it. Other than that, the settings, like I never, like, when I was into like old AD&D in the 90s, I didn't care for Ravenloft anyway. Like, White Wolf already did play supernatural creatures in a world of horror better, as far as I was concerned. And the D&D settings I liked were like Planescape and Dark Sun and like Spelljammer. I like I said, like, part of my problem with a lot of D&D back in the day is I found it too derivative of Tolkien. And this is all based off a real, like, even much more blatant, obvious ripoff of Dracula. So I kind of don't give a shit about it. It's a pretty book. It has resources that people can use. And from that angle, like, I you know, that's why when I did my first review of it, after just thumbing through it for like a few minutes, like, you know, I feel like this is an okay book. I feel like the controversies, I mean, like most of the controversies around this stuff, it's all self-manufactured. You know, it's clickbait. I mean, just like the title of this video, this is all clickbait. Thanks for clicking on it, by the way. And be sure to hit like and subscribe if you want to see more of the old lady talk D&D with me. So
Wait, what?
yeah,
More?
or less. Hit thumbs down if she won't do anymore. Exactly. So, but yeah, that's what Dungeons and Dragons has become. It like everything else has been tainted by Twitter and
I mean,
kids
has
who.
it though? Because if you're playing it, it doesn't matter.
As I said, because they've made the rule system like open source for other people to write their own versions of D&D as long as they don't use the D&D specific branding. Then like yeah, because to me the real thing that is D&D isn't any of like the creatures or what you call shit. It's the rules, and the rules. Anyone can use those rules and write their own games and do what they want. You can have an all orc and black guy game that you write yourself if you want, if that's your thing. You can make like the most like racist game ever. You can make the most super woke game ever, where like like you're not allowed to play straight white men. It doesn't matter. Like it's like sometimes
that
like
would be fun though.
I mean, sometimes doing this shit, like like the whole point of role playing is to put yourself into like other things and mindsets.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but that's also apparently, the guy who DMs that Critical Role show I was talking about apparently had gone onto someone else's live stream as just like a guest player and was given a pre-generated character to play who happened to be Asian. And because he's not Asian, the people in the chat for that live stream got really annoyed and forced him to like stop playing and apologize to them for playing an Asian guy.
Well, that doesn't make any sense, man.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to play the game?
Yeah, because you can only play yourself.
No.
And
that's
so
not...
like, then I don't understand like there shouldn't be any black elves or white elves because no one's able to play an elf properly.
Yeah.
Only Native Americans that can play elves because they're the only real life elves we have, or at least that's the way we act about them. Because that's what being woke is. It's being like just extra not racist. So, anyway,
there you have it.
yeah, it's a fun hobby, guys. Be sure to get in on it. Hit the button.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night.
No. Just hit.